I've always loved walking with my dog, Max, in the late afternoon. It was one of those simple habits that helped me unwind from the day. Behind my house, there's a dirt trail that cuts through a massive cornfield. It had always been a peaceful path, the kind that feels isolated from the rest of the world, but never in a frightening way. I knew every curve, every broken piece of fence around it. But that day, something was different. And I can't explain exactly when I noticed it, but I know it was in a strange way, like the world around me had shifted without me realizing it. I was halfway down the trail when I decided to look back, for no reason at all, just to see the sunset through the rows of corn. And that's when my stomach dropped. The path I had come from simply wasn't there anymore. It was as if it had never existed. The tall, dense corn had swallowed everything. No trail, no dirt path, just endless rows of plants swaying gently in the breeze. My heart started pounding. I blinked a few times, took a step back, hoping it was some kind of illusion, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But they weren't. The path I knew by heart was gone. I stood there frozen, my breath caught in my throat. My mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn. Maybe I wasn't as familiar with the path as I thought. But no, that didn't make sense. I had walked this trail hundreds of times. I knew exactly where I was. And yet, the path behind me was gone, swallowed by the corn as if it had never existed. Max let out a low growl, his ears perked up and his body tensed. He was staring straight ahead, the fur on his back standing up, my gut twisted. I followed his gaze, expecting to see someone or something standing in the path ahead. But there was nothing, just more corn, stretching endlessly in both directions. The wind rustled through the stalks, but it didn't feel natural. It was like a whisper, something just out of reach, something I wasn't supposed to hear. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't panicking, not yet, but I needed to call someone just to hear a familiar voice. As soon as I unlocked the screen, my stomach dropped again. No signal, not even a single bar. That didn't make sense. I had been on this path before and had always had at least some reception. I held the phone higher, moved a few steps to the side, but nothing changed. Just that empty, mocking no service message at the top of the screen. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it. A light, almost imperceptible touch against my leg. Like someone had brushed past me, quick, deliberate. My breath hitched. I spun around so fast that I nearly tripped over my own feet. Nothing, just the corn, swaying slightly. But this time, it wasn't just the wind. I knew that. The movement was different, more purposeful. Like something had just been there and vanished the second I turned. Max started barking wildly, his body low to the ground, his teeth bared. I had never seen him act like that before. That's when I knew I wasn't alone. My chest tightened as Max's barking grew more frantic. His body was rigid, his tail low, the way dogs get when they sense something wrong, something threatening. I turned in circles, scanning the corn for any sign of movement, any shadow, any figure. But there was nothing. Just that endless field, the stalks swaying gently as if they hadn't just swallowed an entire path. My brain screamed at me to move, to do something, but my feet felt like they were stuck in place. Every instinct told me that if I ran, whatever was out there would chase me. I took a slow, shaky breath and bent down to grab Max's collar, trying to steady him. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, though I didn't believe it myself. His body trembled under my grip. Then, somewhere deep in the corn, I heard a soft rustling, different from the wind. It was slow, deliberate, like footsteps brushing against the stalks. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. Someone or something was moving out there just beyond my sight, and it was getting closer. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears, each beat loud enough that I was sure whatever was out there could hear it too. Max was still growling, but now it was lower, almost a warning. The rustling in the corn had stopped. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement, but the silence that followed was worse. It wasn't normal silence. It felt thick, heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath. My fingers tightened around Max's collar. I knew I had to move, but I didn't know which way to go. Then, just when I thought I could convince myself that maybe, just maybe, I was imagining things, the sound came again. Closer this time. A slow, careful step, like someone testing the ground before moving forward. My skin went cold. My instinct screamed at me to run, but where? The path was gone, and I had no idea which direction would lead me out. My breathing turned shallow as I tried to think, but my body had already decided for me. I grabbed Max's leash, turned toward what I hoped was the way home, and started walking fast. Not running, not yet, but my whole body was tense, waiting for something to lunge at me from the corn. I walked as quickly as I could without breaking into a run, forcing myself to stay calm even though every nerve in my body was screaming at me to bolt. Max stayed close, his growls turning into uneasy whimpers. I kept my eyes straight ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that whatever had been in the corn was still there, just beyond my sight, waiting. The wind had picked up slightly, making the stalks sway, but I could tell the difference between the wind and something moving with intention. And that's when I heard it again, this time directly behind me. It wasn't just a rustle. It was the sound of something breaking through the stalks. Not running, but stepping, closing the distance between us. I couldn't help it. I turned, and my stomach dropped. The path behind me was still gone, completely overtaken by the corn. But the worst part? The stalks were still moving, parting slightly, as if something had just stepped back into them to hide. I didn't wait to see what it was. This time I ran. I yanked Max's leash and sprinted forward, crashing through the corn, no longer caring if I was on the right path. I just needed to get out, now. The corn slapped against my arms and face as I ran, but I didn't care. I just kept pushing forward, crashing through the stalks blindly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. Max was right beside me, his leash taut, his breath ragged. I could hear him panting, but I could also hear something moving behind us, not running, but keeping pace. I didn't dare look back. I knew that if I did, I might see something I couldn't handle. I just focused on running, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. The corn was endless. No matter how far I went, the rows stretched on as if I was running in circles. My chest tightened with panic. Had I gotten turned around? Was I making it worse? But then, finally, Through the gaps in the stalks, I saw something, a break in the field, an opening. It wasn't the same path I'd taken, but it didn't matter. It was a way out. I barreled toward it, dragging Max with me, desperate to reach open space. Just as I broke through the last row of corn, I felt something grazing my shoulder, not the stalks. Something solid, something there. I didn't stop. I didn't even breathe. I just threw myself forward, hitting the ground hard as Max yelped beside me. And then, just like that, the sound stopped. The corn behind me was still. The presence, the footsteps, whatever had been there, gone. I scrambled to my feet, spinning around, but there was nothing. Just an empty field and the path leading home, like none of it had ever happened. I stood there, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. Max pressed against my leg, his ears flat, his tail tucked between his legs. He was shaking just as badly as I was. I turned back toward the corn, expecting to see movement, expecting something to reveal itself. But the stalks stood still, gently swaying with the breeze, like nothing had ever disturbed them. The path that had vanished was still missing, just an endless wall of green, cutting off the way I had come. I backed away, still watching, half expecting to hear those footsteps again, to feel that presence creeping closer. But all I heard was my own ragged breathing and Max's uneasy whimpers. My phone was still in my hand, and without thinking, I checked the screen. Full signal, full battery. Like nothing had ever gone wrong. My fingers fumbled to dial a number, any number, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That a path disappeared? That something almost touched me? That I felt like something was hunting me through the corn? Who would believe that? I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back home, locking the door behind me as if that would somehow keep whatever was out there from following. Max wouldn't leave my side, his body glued to me as if he was just as afraid of losing sight of me as I was of losing sight of him. I sat down, shaking, my mind racing through what had happened. But no matter how I tried to make sense of it, I couldn't. The next day, I went back. I had to. I needed to prove to myself that I hadn't lost my mind. The path was there, just like it had always been. No sign that it had ever disappeared. No trampled corn, no broken stalks, nothing. As if the entire thing had never happened. But Max? He wouldn't step foot on the trail. Not anymore. And honestly, I don't think I will either. Because I know what I felt out there. I know something was there. And I know whatever it was, it's still watching.